we are continuing our election postmortem because folks are stunned, they're shocked, they're devastated, they're gutted. Folks did not anticipate not only a loss for Kamala Harris, but also losing the Senate and being on the verge of losing the House of Representatives, which could mean Republicans would have all of the marbles. They have the U.S. Supreme Court pretty much on lock with a 6-3 majority conservative court. They have the Senate on lock. They have the White House on lock. And in a couple of days, they could have the House of Representatives, which brings us to what are we going to do in this country? And of course, when I want to do a deep dive on an election, I can't think of two people more qualified to do that than my good friends, Ed Sanders, who is a veteran political analyst and strategist, and Richard Greene, who is also a Democratic strategist and communication expert. Welcome to the show, Richard and Edward. I think Richard's having some technical difficulties. We hopefully will get him back. But I know you're with us, Ed.
Am I not there?
Oh, you're here. Both. Great.
Okay.
Welcome, Ed, Richard. Thank you. Ed, kick this off. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What happened yesterday?
No, I mean, look, I think first things first, I am no longer trusting any commentary on polls, I think we've talked about in the past, the science of the political science of understanding, who is a likely voter, is off. And the last couple presidential cycles have showed it. This may be a 50-50, country where if we're talking about 100% of always voters, but when we start to get into the conversation of who may vote, who may not vote, it's really difficult to predict, and the models are off. And so what we're seeing is that, the Democratic Party has struggled in, let's say, 2 of the last 3 cycles, 2016 and yesterday, to turn out its base. Donald Trump basically hit his number. He slight surge, but he more or less hit a rather consistent number for him. And the real issue here is that yesterday the Democratic vote didn't match the vote in 2020. Nationwide, roughly 13 to 15 million votes difference between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Kamala ended up coming in right around where Hillary did. And now you've got to measure, what is it? Where did those 15 million votes drop off? And what are the issues that bring those people back to the ballot box? I think in 2020, it was pretty clear with the COVID and the way that Trump mismanaged that whole process, that people were engaged, came out, voted against him. This time, I think what's unfortunate, and let me say this, I do think the vice president ran a hell of a campaign. Let me say that, right off the bat, when you look at the headwinds that she had, Biden's, approval rating was sub 40%. He stumbled in that debate. For her to jump in when she did and basically run a short presidential race, the honest truth is she ended up pulling in, about 2 million more votes than Hillary Clinton, and that's really admirable in such a short term. But the party really has to figure out what it's got to do to talk to people to bring them back to the polls in the fashion that they did in 2020. So yeah, that's the sum and the short of it.
That is a shocking number, Ed and Richard. 15 million voters did not vote in this election, who are Democratic voters who voted in 2020. Richard, and I guess the big question I have is, did we lose them? Have they defected to the Republican Party? Did they fall off the voting rolls? I mean, you just don't lose 15 million. Maybe we're not talking about 15,000. This is a huge number. Where are those voters? And what went wrong with our operation that we weren't able to get those 15 million people to the polls?
I have a 4-letter word for you, and not that one, that will explain this. I just saw a video from Torre. Do you know Torre?
Yes.
Torre is saying that the 15 million who did not vote for president, those were Gaza protest votes, not just in Dearborn, Michigan, but across the country. And if that is true, I think we need to have a really really long come to Jesus conversation with those 15 million people.
Have you seen that, Richard? Because I have not seen those voters identified in that way.
That's what Torre said. That's what Torre said.
A journalist, but Ed, have you seen that? Because I have not seen that in any of the exit polls.
No, but there really is no reason for people who did vote. And my understanding of the video from Torre is these are actually 15 million Democratic voters who went to the polls, who voted for Senate, they voted for other things, and they left the president blank because they couldn't vote for Trump or Kamala. If that is the case, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my political life.
Right. No, I get what you're saying. I'm just asking Ed because I have not been able to confirm that.
Yeah, I don't think honestly, I haven't seen any data like that. And Richard, I think we'll dissect this over the coming year as people can identify who the drop off voters are and where they are. There could be certain demographics, there could be certain geographical realities about who that is. But I think instinctually there are a number of different reasons why somebody might not have voted. Gaza is one, but truth be told, the economy, it could be other, social issues that drive the day. And I think we're going to find that it's a complete mix. My sense is that 2020, again, there was this crisis of COVID and a clear mismanagement of the incumbent and a lot of anger at the incumbency. And that brought people out to the polls to reach that 80 million. In this case, the incumbent is Joe Biden, the feeling of a lackluster economy. They didn't come out to support Kamala, but I don't disagree with you that there are some protest votes in there, but I don't think all 15 million by any stretch.
Yeah, I can tell you. My 7-state battleground tour, I met a lot of voters. Obviously, I did not meet 15 million of them, and Gaza hardly ever came up with the Black voters that I engage with in big cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta. It just did not come up. So I tend to agree with you, Ed, that we're going to learn that there are lots of reasons. And I can tell you the reasons that I heard from those Black voters, and it had more to do with this notion that the Democrats take them for granted, that they don't come around to their neighborhoods until it's time for the election. That was one of the big reasons in the exit polls for Sherrod Brown's loss in that Ohio Senate race. Black voters who generally like Sherrod Brown because he's a nice guy, but felt like they didn't know him. They didn't see him. He was not visible in a way that connected them to them and their vote. So this political article just came out. It's just a scathing article on both Harris, on Biden, on the party, on voters. I think there's a jab at Black women at the end with this reference to Sister Soldier. I don't take kindly to a lot of the comments and a lot of the underhanded remarks towards Kamala Harris. I agree with you, Ed, that she ran a near flawless campaign. She did something that was basically impossible to do in the 107 days that she had. But we know the chattering class of strategists. These are the folks that make millions of dollars every year in campaigns. They've got to come out and, start pointing the fingers so that they can, make themselves look like the heroes for the next big election. So a couple of things that they say that are really troubling. One, they basically say Kamala Harris has no substance, had no policies, and should not have ever been selected to be the VP when she was selected to be the VP some years ago, and definitely should not have been, as they said, crowned by Biden after he stepped aside. They go on to say, and this is a rumor I've been hearing, Ed, so I don't know if you're hearing this, that there was internal polling from the gate that showed that she was never going to win this election, that she was never going to win in the battleground states. And the rumor goes that Obama and Nancy Pelosi were late, come to the party folks. They were holdouts because they had seen similar polling. And they did not want her as a candidate. They wanted Mark Kelly, I'm hearing, or someone like a Mark Kelly, and that Biden, who was fiercely loyal to Harris, outmaneuvered them and, endorsed her 15 minutes after he stepped down. So 2 questions here. One, Did you hear that rumor about Obama and Nancy having seen some polling and wanting a different candidate? And two, what are we to make on this perhaps polling that said we never had a chance?
I would say this. I think on the second question first. Well, let me do it this way. The decision making at that time, I haven't, I don't know, and I'm not privy to who saw what poll, but I think the decision making at that time was really fueled by, quite honestly, Biden's plummeting in the polls after the debate. And I don't think that could be underscored enough. I think you were seeing it in people's reactions in the head-to-head, again, matchup with Trump. You were seeing it in the fundraising most pronounced, where the money was just not coming in. And on every airwave, it was a disaster for Biden. So him staying in the race, that couldn't have happened. And anyone that thinks that Biden would have done or fared better against Trump yesterday is delusional.
Oh, no. The article doesn't make that claim. They make the claim that, one, he shouldn't have even run a second term. He should have stepped aside after term one, and that he should not have anointed Kamala Harris because the polling showed that she was never going to win. That's what the article says.
Yeah, I don't know about that because, let's take back to the 2020 primary season. There were a whole host of candidates from Amy Klobuchar to Kamala, all over the place. And none of them were even remotely strong enough to come close to the just sort of the perception that Biden was out there. Biden wrapped up that primary mostly because there weren't any strong Democratic primary candidates, Kamala included. Now, when you get to the point where you realize that Biden simply cannot win, and at that juncture, I think, the Hail Mary was, you got to step down. And at that point, the question of who do you go to, Kamala really was the only one in place to do it. And you could have tried to substitute in a Mark Kelly. You could have tried to put somebody else in. It would have been so messy. And the Republicans already hit the Democrats on the substitution, that it was an unfair process. To have leapfrogged over the sitting vice president to find a candidate would have been a disaster. I don't think anybody else other than Kamala could have fared with as many votes. Now, let me say this. I think all of the polling that showed, or any, thoughts that she couldn't have won, that may and probably is true, right? And, you can see in the rumor looking for Mark Kelly, this highlights where I think the true problem with the party is. They lack white males that can speak to other white males within the party and capture the message. It's why a Mark Kelly's name would have come up in the first place, is they would have been looking for someone that could appeal, on a military standpoint, that could speak to white men and sort of stop that defection to the Republican Party. And the truth of the matter is the party is lacking stars in that space that can compete on the national stage. But all that aside, Kamala was really the only clear choice you could have done at that time.
How about you, Richard? Have you heard this rumor, and what do you make of these alleged polls that showed that demonstrated very early that she could not win this election?
I don't believe it for a second.
Okay.
I don't believe it for a second. This was a very, very, very winnable race. And when it all comes out, we're going to have lost Wisconsin by 30, 40,000, Pennsylvania by about 200,000. Very rough numbers. They're still coming in. Let's say Michigan by 80 or 100,000. That's less than like 400,000 votes out of 330 million people. That's not a lot. Let me tell you why the Democrats lost. Their messaging sucks. It is horrible. It is terrible. For example, when that trans ad, Kamala's with they, them, Donald Trump is with you. The first time I saw that ad, I had a visceral reaction as a communication strategist. I went, shit, that is a really powerful ad. Why didn't we fight against it? I had to personally go Google to see how they could have even made that claim. And there was some innocuous, simple, nothing comment that she made that she could easily have walked back And our inability to fight the lies that are coming from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and the entire Fox News infrastructure is political malpractice. The border is not open. It's not wide open. It could be more closed, but it's not open. We are not sending Johnny to second grade class and having him come out of that class later that day a girl. That is not happening. And our inability to fight back against the lies, our inability to educate women and people who support women that we were literally 4 House members and 1 senator and 1 president away from restoring their reproductive rights is malpractice. There is a huge difference between saying, I'm going to go back and I'm going to fight to restore reproductive rights, as opposed to, we need 1 more senator. I'm going to be that senator. So on so many, and they should have had a Newt Gingrich list of things that they were going to do. Here are the 10 things we are going to do. We're going to penalize corporations for price gouging, and we're going to lower your grocery prices. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. This was a horrible messaging experience. And I agree with Ed. Let me just finish. I agree with Ed. But having said that, I thought Kamala was spectacular in how she grew as a candidate, and she deserved to be president for sure.
So I hear you on this messaging. And first of all, I will say that a lot of those messages that you just articulated were said both by her and surrogates. But what I don't think we can underestimate or overestimate or gloss over, I think is probably the better term, is that Donald Trump is a personality that people bought into, like a cult figure. And it didn't matter what her policies were at points, or what her statements were, or statements of fact to push back, because people at some point have an alternative reality. I sat on a show last night doing election night coverage, and literally the question was asked, what was the closing argument by both candidates? The Republican commentator gave this very articulate, put together closing argument, but that wasn't Donald Trump's argument. Donald Trump's argument was, call Nancy Pelosi the B word, talk about his beautiful white skin, talk about training a gun to Liz Cheney's face. He just acted as if none of that had been said by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump had a cogent, and persuasive argument on the economy and immigration. So we just live in 2 different realities when you talk about Republicans and Democrats. All right, let's talk about Elon Musk. So Elon Musk buys Twitter, renames it X, tells us it's going to be a public square that's open to all voices and all viewpoints, that he's going to, mete out the vitriol, the hatred, and the political bots. And he does everything but those things. He turns it into a mouthpiece for his own conspiracy theories, extreme theory, turns it into a mouthpiece for the Republican Party, and then goes one step further, turns it into a mouthpiece for Donald Trump, and then decides to put hundreds of millions of dollars into a super PAC to run Donald Trump's ground game. We know Donald Trump has never had a very strong campaign team, very traditional campaign team. That's not the way he operates. But Elon Musk saw a need for there to be a ground game and said, I'm willing to take it on and to finance it. We had Jeff Bezos basically putting his thumb on the scale, saying no endorsement from the Washington Post. We saw the owner of the LA Times, another billionaire, saying no endorsement in the presidential election from the LA Times. These billionaires are active. They were active. They obviously are cozying up to Donald Trump. And this is dangerous for us. It's dangerous for journalism, but really could change forever how elections are run in this country.
Yeah, we're really entering another Gilded Age when you start to look at it, and the way the billionaire class played politics this cycle. And we do recall in the last Trump administration how many billionaires there were in the cabinet. And the honest truth, investigative journalism has never really laid out what those billionaires gained from their participation in the administrations. But with Elon Musk, I think, one of the first things that come to mind, obviously the wealth, he's the world's wealthiest man. And what he, when you can fork over what I think $120 million to do turnout, that is just circumventing the donor laws, in ways that are now legal. But I would call out the rise of social media and the change of social media in this election cycle. What I will give the Republicans a lot of credit on is they established the issues that decided this election, and social media did it. And it might not have necessarily been the campaign. There are hundreds of thousands of content producers that produce content that just amplified the messaging that I think decided this race. You can think about the dogs and cats in Ohio, eating dogs and cats. That ran viral. You can think about, honestly, during the Olympics, the fighter that, I think the transgender fighter that was fighting the female in the Olympics, that ran, constantly. And it just reinforced campaign themes that Trump was hitting. And, the honest truth is, I think they used it to establish, and they did it very well. They established those issues that they wanted to run on. Immigration as well, the quote of the invasion and all of that. You saw that online. And the truth of the matter is, most people open up their social media before they get their news from, the corporate news stations. But your point is well taken. The billionaire class really came to play in this election, and you named a handful of them, and we know the others across the spectrum were playing roles in different areas as well.
Yeah, let's talk about Gen X. Richard, you love to talk about young voters. Last night, we saw long lines at lots of colleges and universities. We know that the Democrats made a big play for young voters. They had a lot of pop icons from Taylor Swift to Cardi B come out to try to energize that young vote. I don't think I've seen the exit polls in terms of how Gen X and young voters turned out in this election compared to 2020 and 2016. Do you have those numbers?
Not yet. And but I have to say, first of all, I want to say Elon Musk probably is the second richest man in the world, and I want to know what he and Vladimir Putin were talking about all these past months, and was there any shenanigans that was going on? But that's a whole nother issue. I think the problem that Democrats have with young people is the same problem that they have with older people, which is the brand sucks. The brand does not have the power that it had when you and I were young. Whereas, it was the anti-Vietnam War protest, and only Democrats were doing that. What is the identity of the Democratic Party? And whatever it is in a positive way has been polluted by all this trans stuff and this broken border stuff, and crime is terrible, and they don't care about your pride. They keep saying the economy is great, but you can't afford bacon or eggs. So again, for me, the best communicator almost always wins elections. And I think Kamala was fantastic, but her messaging was not strong. And she suffered, if we're honest, from the fact that she's not a man. So you had a very competent woman in 2016 beaten by an incompetent man. You had an old white guy who gets to beat the incompetent white man. And then you have a very competent black woman who can't beat the even more incompetent guy. So I think we have a problem with misogyny. And yes, if Gen Z had gone out and voted at the levels that older people voted, it's always going to be different. But I want to say one last thing. The most important thing in this election is going to be revealed, not last night. It's going to be revealed in the next few hours, maybe the next few days. And that is what happens to the mostly California House candidates in this election. Are the mail-in ballots going to save them? Because they're all behind by a few thousand votes. If Democrats lose the House, Republicans will have a trifecta. They will have complete control over the Senate, they will have complete control over the White House, and they will have complete control over the House of Representatives. That's called a trifecta. What that means is I promise you within the next few months, there will be some form of a national abortion ban, which will affect every single person in all 50 states. And it's going to come down to 1 or 2 House seats in the next couple of days.
Yeah, we'll talk about those House seats, Ed. I know you've studied what's going on in California closely, but we do have an update from NBC on Gen X voters across the board. Both genders, meaning men and women, voted pro-Trump, despite the overturning of Roe v. Wade, despite his guilty verdict for being a sex abuser, or the adjudication basically that he was a rapist, despite his just long history of misogyny. Ed, young voters said, that's our guy. Oh,
yeah.
Disturbing.
Yeah, I think Richard, you started to characterize it right. The fight that draws young voters in used to be sort of the anti-war fight, right? The let's get us out of Vietnam, all of those sorts of things that have always sort of driven the young voter in. The truth of the matter is the Republican Party captured that momentum. There wasn't anything in to your point about
what did they have, Ed? They weren't getting out of anything.
The immigration issue. I think the immigration issue and the open border conversation was palatable amongst the young voters. I'll wait to see what the data bears out, but my sense is that plays a lot heavier than those of my generation think it does.
I think the most compelling thing that I heard over and over and over from people who are voting for Trump was, I had more money in my bank account. I was doing better when he was president. And Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party needed to have an answer for that, and we didn't. And citing some economist, sitting in an ivory tower in some, school, in Massachusetts, that doesn't cut it. We needed to have an answer for that.
I got to correct the record on that, Richard. We saw Charlemagne the God. We saw untold numbers of surrogates. Obama himself breaking down this notion that somehow folks got STEMI checks and they had all this money because of the pandemic and that Donald Trump was responsible for it. I know myself and 1,000 guests on this show ad nauseum beat that drum, broke that down. Who was responsible for those checks? How those checks were a one-time situation tied to a horrific pandemic, not something that people should expect in January of 2025. So there were powerful messages about that particular pot of money that many young folks identified. We got to take a break. When we come forward, I want to talk about one of the statements in this Politico article says that the reason Kamala Harris lost was because she could not separate herself from Joe Biden. They referenced that answer she gave on The View when they says, what's one thing that you would say, separates you from Biden? And Kamala Harris responded, there wasn't anything that she could think of in the moment. The writer of this article and the chattering class of strategists say that was fatal to her loss. A lot of folks feel like they were betrayed, Ed. They said they went to bed thinking that the results coming out this morning would show that Kamala Harris had won. They had bought into the polls leading up to yesterday that said that this race was tight, that she had a pathway through the blue wall, and that she would carry the day. And we saw something totally different. Georgia came in first for Donald Trump. Georgia or North Carolina, one of the two last night. As I saw those, I started to get worried and knew that things probably didn't look too good. It was a deja vu to 2016. So everybody's out with their analysis, what she did right, what she did wrong, what the party did right, what the party did wrong. And that Politico article that I sent you talks about that interview on The View. And says at that interview, when she was asked what would she do differently, or how would her administration be different than Joe Biden's, she said she couldn't think of anything. And Republicans ran with that. What do you make of that as a part of perhaps what tanked her campaign?
I mean, that very specific interview, okay, fine. But the issue is this, that the Biden administration itself, the wrong track question, whenever they polled, is the country on the right track or wrong track? It was something like 75%, have been saying that the country is on the wrong track. And that makes this a change election, right? And so between Kamala and Trump, it was really a race to be the change agent. And, I think her answer to that, does say that, she's part of the administration. And again, Trump and Vance always spoke about her as though she was part of, very key to the administration and very much, at the table in everything they did. The irony of it all is as Biden and Harris took office, I don't think she was very much at the table. The team Biden did isolated her in ways that didn't bring her to the table. This is where the short runway, I think, hurt her. So as she becomes the nominee, it takes time to put together your package of ideas and policy proposals. She had been in a mode where she is advocating his. And, the honest truth is, in a very short time, it's very difficult, given everything that was going on, for her to put together her proposal. I honestly think that's why it did take her some time to sit down and do an interview. But when this one did come around, that was a bad answer. I do wish she had an answer that did put some distance between her and Joe Biden, because they're wildly different people and they have wildly different priorities. And she should have expressed those. And, I think the idea that as a prosecutor and with that delivery that she has, she should have dove in on the issues that are near and dear to her, showed her passion. And I think you would have seen, you could have taken that issue off the table. The bottom line, though, this is still a change election and very clear that Trump, became the change agent here.
Yeah, Richard, we talked a lot leading up to this election about Black men. Black men defecting to the Republican Party, and now the numbers are in pretty much, and they show that Black men voted for Donald Trump, or Black people, men and women, are pretty much at the same rate that they've done historically over the last two elections. But we also see white women. 59% of white women broke for Donald Trump, 69% in the state of Georgia alone. What do you make of that in light of the overturning of Roe v. Wade and your pronouncement that if the House goes to the Republicans, there's going to be a federal abortion ban? Do white women just don't care about abortions and body autonomy?
So you know me, it all comes down to communication and messaging. So before the break, you said you were hearing all sorts of explanations about why grocery prices were high and why it wasn't Joe Biden's fault. What was the solution you heard? What was the solution the voters heard, as opposed to Donald Trump?
The solution was, I'm going to do something about price gouging.
Right. But again, that's nowhere. To be effective as a communicator, you need to be concrete. We're going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. We're going to deport 11 million illegal aliens who have no business being in this country. We're going to not tax tips. We're going to give you money for this. We're going to give you money for that. Donald Trump was like a carnival barker giving out free pizzas, and Kamala couldn't compete with that. And so I think it's just a problem with communication. I don't think one interview where she said, I can't think of anything, I think that was in a way laudable. She is so loyal to Joe Biden, and I love that. That should be a positive attribute. And I am suggesting, and I just did a TikTok late last night, and it got well over 1 million views. And I'm suggesting that Joe Biden do a favor for Kamala Harris. And I want to hear what you think about it. I think Joe Biden should resign before noon on January 20th and allow Kamala Harris to be the first female president of the United States. That could easily be done. He just has to step aside. Kamala instantly becomes president for the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and give some hope and some acknowledgement to what an extraordinary human being she is and public servant. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know about that, Ed. What do you think? A lot of folks will think that's pandering. They'll think that is demeaning to her.
Patronizing. Yeah, it's a noble sentiment. I mean, listen, if they're going to get anything
Let's
done,
break the glass ceiling is what I'm saying.
I would be in
contact breaking it
with,
for 20 seconds. That's not very meaningful.
Yeah. If they're going to do anything in this period, I would start to look at some of, the Supreme Court justices where they could make it. And I love Sonia Sotomayor. But I think, when you start looking at sort of the ages, if they could replace a justice very quickly, you might want to do that.
Yeah, I don't think that's not Richard. I get your point, but it sounds so gimmicky. And it's, I would think, beneath the brand for Kamala Harris. If Joe Biden really wanted to resign and make her president and give her a real opportunity to be president, that should have been done months ago, a year ago, or sometime where she could have really served as
Right.
president ceremonially.
I agree with that.
For 20 minutes, I think it is demeaning to her. I think it's patronizing. I think it does to her what Donald Trump says he's going to do to women when he says, I'm going to protect you, whether you like it or not. A big part of this race for me, what's so disturbing, is the patriarchy. And so the white women vote, that I go back to these white women, and we can't seem to divorce white women from their love of patriarchy. Black women, we break with Black men. Black women don't wait on Black men to tell us how to vote, who to vote for. We lead in our households in terms of who we vote for. That ad that Julia Roberts voiced over was telling white women, you can secretly vote for whomever you choose. You don't have to tell your husband, because we recognize in this society that white women aren't oftentimes leading in their household who to vote for. And I think that's a disturbing issue. Doesn't have anything to do with messaging, doesn't have anything to do with, answers on an interview. That's a real issue. And until we, fundamentally figure out how to deal with that, we're going to keep losing white women. I mean, the number of white women we lost in this election is horrifying.
But Donald Trump and
30 seconds.
Donald Trump and patriarchy provides something that is critical for what a lot of people, men and women, need, which is a strong man, which is, I'm going to take care of you. And that was, in fact, the closing message of Donald Trump. I'm going to take care of you. And for whatever screwed up reason, that really resonates for people who are insecure and need a strong man influence in their life.
With the 90% of Black women that voted for Kamala Harris, but go ahead, Ed, your 30 seconds on this patriarchy issue that's killing us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when we look at it in terms of identity politics, whether gender or whatnot, the African-American vote, I think, is unique in the country, just given the construction of the Republican Party and its aggressiveness towards African-Americans. So yes, we vote 90% against the Republicans, but to assume that white women are going to vote in a block and pin our hopes on that, is a fallacy. I don't think we should try to do that. White women, are going to move across the different issues.
Well, we know they're not going to vote in solidarity with other women of color on issues as important as women's health care. So it's not necessarily about voting in a block, but it's standing with other women when you tell us you're with us, and then you go to the ballot box and do something totally different. Oh, so much to discuss. We'll be discussing for the next year on this election.
Or 4 years.
Have to have you come back, because that House is up for grabs, and that's very, very scary, because the Republicans will have all the marbles if they win the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you so much, Richard.